Last week we saw that Jesus laid out for the people in Nazareth his agenda, his ministry plan, if you will. And we saw that the way Christ framed his ministry said something about this gospel, this good news of which Jesus was and is a herald. But we also saw that this gospel, precisely because of its character, because of the way that it informed, shaped, influenced the ministry of Jesus, also brought opposition. So why would Jesus have a ministry like the one that he had? Why would he spend so much time with the people that he spent time with? Why would he do the things that he did? That's really what we're reflecting upon this morning. And the answer that Luke gives is really quite interesting. Now let's begin by setting the stage for this discourse. Look there at verses 1 and 2. You'll see that there were lots of these tax collectors and sinners who were gathering around Jesus. And the way that Luke frames this, from our point of view, looking back on it as we do, we would say that Luke has constructed categories here. You've got the politically disenfranchised, and you've got the moral outcasts, the morally excluded, or even the religiously excluded. And those categories are helpful for us to think about what's actually happening. They do describe some of these people that come around Jesus in a little more detail for us. But we need to remember that in the minds of Jesus's opponents, for that matter, in the minds of his disciples and of just average observers, there was no such differentiation. They tended to think about things as a cohesive whole. So, in a sense, it's just as bad to be a tax collector as a sinner, and it's just as, not just morally reprehensible, but politically, and I would also say, religiously problematic to be in either category. Either group could be seen as a traitor to Israel's God. And the question that the religious authorities, that the elites who shaped Israelite religious and oftentimes political thinking, the question that they are asking is why? Why? Now, when Jesus answers this question in other parts of the Gospels, he points to the need of those to whom he is ministering, right? You remember that famous line, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, it's the sick, right? Okay? So in those instances, he points to the need of those to whom he is ministering. That's not what he does here. Here, he he points them in kind of the opposite direction. He points them to the heart of the God that makes that ministry possible. Now, there's lots of stuff that we could talk about in this parable, but I want us to dip down there where the son comes to his senses. The younger son comes to his senses. What, 18, 19, 20, right in there? Why does this younger son come to his senses? And I want us to start here because I think that it bears directly on our larger question, which is, what is it about the heart of God that makes this good news possible, that gives this good news its content, its implications for our lives and for the lives of everyone in the world? Now, the traditional answer is sort of enlightened self-interest. Basically, he wakes up and he's starving to death, right? And that's certainly part of it. People are they're not even willing to give this man the food that people would only eat when they're starving to death. That's one answer. And it's certainly part of the equation. But it's not the only answer. Notice what the man says to himself. Before he says, "And here I am starving to death," he says, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare?" What is he pointing to? He is pointing to a certain disposition in how his father runs his business. That is, he points to his father's generosity. Right? There is something in this young man's disposition that says to himself, "Hey, this is ridiculous. As bad as it's going to be facing my father, as embarrassing as that's going to be, as humiliating as that's going to be, it's better than being here." Now, the son has no idea what awaits him. He has no idea of the full extent of his father's grace. Truth be told, he has no concept of his father's love for him. But he knows enough to think, "Man, this is stupid. What am I doing here? I'm getting out of town." Already that says something about the heart of the Father. It is the realization that we all, I would argue, must have in order to truly turn to God initially. Yes, we want people to have an awareness of their own need. You know, we do want them to know that from a spiritual point of view, they've been snacking on peanut hulls. You know. But all that does is leave them in despair if they do not know that there is a gracious God waiting for them on the other side. So as we think about that gracious God, as we think about the Father's heart for His Son, let's first do a little bit of contrast work here. Let's look at the heart of the older son. Heart of this older son. Now, let's understand something from the beginning, all right? The sympathies of Jesus' hearers would have been, at least initially, with the older son, okay? Because here this knucklehead has run off with his, a third of his dad's money and now has blown it. Wealth was not easily acquired in the ancient world, and it was easily lost. Moreover, the son expresses a sentiment that a lot of people in that world could relate to. Only we look back on this parable through the lens of 2,000 years of church history and empathize with the younger son. Even if you gave this parable to somebody who has never read the Bible today, and they read this, they would empathize with the younger son. That's how much influence Christianity has had on our value structure, okay, as a society. But at the same time, we can relate to the older son too. Now, we don't know why the older son is so upset about what's happening. Here, it's not even really germane to the point that Jesus is trying to make. All we know is that the older son feels like he's gotten the shaft in all this. Now, how do we know about this older son's heart? Because it's one thing to say he's, kind of upset about how things have turned out. It's another thing to say, well, actually, he turns from being the sort of the hero of the story to being its, I wouldn't say villain, but maybe its goat. And by that, we don't mean greatest of all time. Now, how do we know that? Well, one way that we know it is because of the way that he treats his father. He should, when his father comes out and speaks to him, he should address his father with sir or father. But he just launches right into his objection. We know this because he actually does not fulfill his own role in this unfolding drama. If this kind of thing were to take place, and if a younger son were to come home, it's actually the older son's responsibility to build that bridge with the father, to bring the younger son back into the family and say, okay, Dad, I know he messed up, but he's ours. So we got to take care of him. It's the older son's responsibility to be the advocate. And that's not what he's doing here. What he's doing is he's saying, look, how can you take this knucklehead back after what he's done? But the most important feature of this discourse, that the one that Luke really wants you to notice, is the way that the older son disavows his brother, disowns him, really. Notice what he says. This son of yours, not my brother, okay? This son of yours. Now, in case you're thinking this is just an accident of the language or how the story is told, we're going to see that it's not here in just a minute. But Luke wants you to catch that little sign there. This son of yours. Now, for us in the modern world, we need one little fact that's supposed to help us make this connection. Siblings were often thought to have the closest relationship of any relationship in the ancient world, even closer than husband and wife. Your relationship with your brother, your relationship with your sister was thought to be even closer than your marital relations. That is, it was just a cultural thing. There's nothing in Scripture that says that that's supposed to be how it is, but that's what you saw in these pre-industrial agrarian societies. That's not what you see here. What you see here is something we might remember from Genesis chapter 4. Am I my brother's keeper? Now, we want to hold that in our minds because, of course, we're contrasting the heart of this older brother to the heart of God, to the heart of the Father. But at the same time, we want to hold it in our minds too, because this can be us. Mm-hmm. We can feel this way. We'll come back to that part at the end. But let's turn to the Father's heart, okay? And let's sort of tick through the evidence here. What is it that we learn about the Father's heart from this text? And let's go all the way back to the beginning, back to verses 11 and 12. What happens in this text? The son comes to his father and says, hey, give me my portion of the inheritance. Well, because of the way that things were done, that's essentially saying to your dad, hey, I wish you'd just drop dead, but since you're not going to, give me my money. Now, the father has some options here. He could simply have his son punished. And by punished, we don't mean sent to his room for an hour. He could have had him flogged. But what does he do? He acquiesces to his request. He says, okay. And it's easy sort of, once we kind of get past that point and realize what's going on here, it's easy sort of to tick off the evidence for this father's heart for his youngest son. He's paying attention, wanting this son to return home. He knows what the son is in for. This can be a hard world in which they lived. Famines were not uncommon. He's watching, he's waiting. And we see the reunion. We see the passion there. And we see the father's heart for this son. The son returns and the son's got this all figured out. I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be your son. He's just hoping to get hired as a laborer. That's what he's hoping. Because at least if he's hired as a laborer, he won't starve to death. Yes, he'll be humiliated in the village. Yes, everybody will know what happened to him. But, it's kind of funny. A lot of that stuff falls away in terms of its importance once you got an empty belly. The father is having none of it. The father not only runs to meet him, something that would have almost never been done in the ancient world. The father not only throws his arms around him and kisses him with this familial affection, But as soon as the son starts his carefully rehearsed speech, the father is just, no, we're not doing that. He turns to the servants and says, go get the best robe, put it on him. Go put sandals on his feet. Okay, up to this point, we're kind of like, well, yeah, I bet his clothes are raggedy and he probably doesn't have any shoes. He's probably barefoot, probably lost them trying to feed himself somehow. And then he says, and put a ring on his finger. That ring is a status marker. It could be a family signet ring. But whatever it is a status marker that says you are part of the family. It's full inclusion. The Father loves this Son. It's the reason that He let him go in the first place, let him learn the hard way, and it's the reason that He is, as some people picture it, waiting on the front porch for the kid to come home. Because He loves His Son. But here's the thing about being the older brother, the responsible child. Sometimes the father's love for this younger, irresponsible child can feel as though it is indulgent, and it can feel as though this means that the father doesn't love me, the responsible kid, the one who he ought to love, right? Jesus doesn't say, but I'm sure that that's what's rolling around in the mind of the older son. And sometimes we can hear Jesus' words in particular as judgment, as condemnation towards those of us who really have tried to obey. That's why I think it's really important for us to pay attention to this parable. What do we learn in this parable about the father's heart for the older son? What happens? Okay, they throw a big party, all right? This thing is, we're having a big blowout bash. They killed the fattened calf, which would feed the entire village. And you invite the whole village because A, because they need the food, and B, because you want everybody to share your joy, right? This is we all gather together and there's, the NIV tells us there's music and dancing, right? This is a party. And the older brother finds out what's happening, and he won't even come in. Now, again, the father has a choice to make. He could simply have the older brother punished for, once again, kind of humiliating him. He could send the head servant back out and say, your father says, get your backside in here. He could order him to do what he knows he ought to do. He doesn't do that. What does he do? He comes outside himself and pleads with him. Moreover, he emphasizes persuasion rather than coercion. He doesn't make his son do what he ought to do. And he listens to the son's complaint. He doesn't rebuke him for his hard-heartedness. He doesn't even rebuke him for failing to use the proper honorific title. Look, let's be clear, okay? I don't know if you've ever been there, but I have. This guy, he's tired of his father. He is tired of his mess. He's like, I'm done. You took this sorry sucker back, and here I am. I've been slaving for you all these years. I don't feel like I can ever please you. I can't ever make you happy. No, I'm done. I'm out. Forget it. I'm not helping you celebrate this good-for-nothing kid. And the father doesn't rebuke the son for his temper tantrum. He doesn't rebuke him for his selfishness. He doesn't rebuke him for his insolence. And by the way, I don't use that word selfishness lightly. I don't mean to cast aspersions on this young man. Just because you're advocating for yourself doesn't necessarily mean that you are sinning. Okay? That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that he's focused only on how all of this affects him, and apparently the thought has never crossed his mind what this all means for the younger son. Now, the father does all of this without letting him get away with anything. How does he do that? With a brilliant turn of rhetoric. He lays the foundation by reminding the older son, look, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. It's kind of the reminder, hey, look, just because I love him does not mean I love you any less. This is not a zero-sum game. It's not, and by the way, people a lot of times in the ancient world saw honor as a zero-sum game. The only way I get honor is by taking it away from somebody else. The father is saying that's not how any of this works. My love for this younger son has nothing to do with how I treat you, reflect upon you, feel about you. You are still the primary heir. Which means now, because he blew his inheritance, everything I have is yours. So he lays this firm foundation, but then he turns. He says, but we had to celebrate because this brother of yours was dead and is now alive. He was lost, but now he is found. It's beautiful. I wish I could come up with responses like this to things that people say. It's beautiful. That's why he's Jesus and I'm not. But it's right. Yeah, you know, and it's beautiful. Because on the one hand, he shifts the brother's focus away from his sort of petulant self-pity to this brother who very well could have ended up dead. I mean, even without doing anything wrong, the brother could have been going off to a far country to buy some property and just kind of have his own homestead. He could have been killed on the way by robbers. To say nothing of, you start cavorting with prostitutes, you find yourself in some sketchy company. They might have never seen him again, and the father would never know what happened to his son. So he shifts his focus away from his own sort of self-pity, while at the same time reminding him of his own responsibilities. This is your brother too. He's not just my son, he's your brother. And you have certain obligations to him. It's brilliant. And sometimes it's exactly what we need to hear. We need to be reminded that God still loves us, while also being reminded that we have obligations to those around us. So what is it that Jesus is trying to say, not only in this parable, but in all three of the parables in this chapter? Well, it's really simple. God cares about lost people. God celebrates, all of heaven celebrates, in fact, when a lost person turns to God, when a lost person repents and believes, and we should celebrate too. Because that's what his heart is. But in the midst of that conversation, we can sometimes feel, especially those of us who at least tried in our lives to color inside the lines, we can feel as though nothing we do is ever good enough for God. We're always under condemnation, but at the same time, we didn't get to have any of the fun either. And all those people who got to go out and have all the fun, they get to be saved in the end, and they don't have to go through all the stuff that we went through. And the more that you suffer with Jesus, because that's part of Christian discipleship too, the more that you suffer with Jesus, the more possible it is for you to have that feeling, that emotion. You know, the really neat thing about this parable is that it shows us the gospel is good news for people like us too. The gospel isn't just good news for the down and out. It's good news for those who colored inside the lines and wonder if it's all worth it. Now, to be sure, there is that correction we've been talking about. There is that reminder that our priorities and our values and our goals are supposed to be different than they were before. That's what it means to take up your cross and follow Jesus. But there is also the reminder that our Father is not unsympathetic to our frustration. He's not unsympathetic to our pain. He's not unsympathetic. All he wants us to do is humble ourselves and come to him with these frustrations so that he can set us free from our tomb-like indifference to the struggles, pains, heartaches of others. That's what he's looking for. And that's what he wants for all of us, to be free. Free from sin and free from self-righteousness. Let us pray.